Welcome to Take It from the Ironwoman. My name is Susanne Müller, your host and the Ironwoman. This podcast is about empowering yourself and others to make real changes in the world. You will hear from everyday, smart, sophisticated, hip people like you and me. Not everybody has to be an Ironwoman to impress the world. Together, we will learn from the sports and business leaders how you can become a more successful person as an entrepreneur or a leader. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. Take your steps now. Take your big steps now. Join me on this journey to success. Take it from the Ironwoman. We only have a special guest, and today, finally, we go and talk to Libby. Libby is a dear friend of mine. I know her from New York, from the Organizational Development Network. And she was always there. She always has great ideas. That's how I remember you when I think of you. And now, from her biography, we can even read Libby received her first well-deserved rejection letter from Random House at age 5. And these days, she has a blog. And not only a blog, but she's blogging daily. And what is it all about? We want to hear from her. Libby, introduce yourself. Welcome, finally.
Well, thanks for having me on, Suzanne. You always interview the most interesting people, and I was really flattered when you wanted to interview me because I am really impressed by how interesting the other people you've talked to have been.
Well, you have a good story too. That's why we need to hear it. What is it that you're writing about? And what is the blog called? First of all, we need to hear that.
The blog is called Change Plus Management. And I started it in 2017 when I left my job. And I had all sorts of job titles, but I had basically been doing change management there. I wanted to share my experiences and let people learn about change management through my blog. And so over time, since then, it has evolved. During COVID, it really evolved a lot. It became much more about personal change, my personal change and the personal change of people around me as different family members were taking care of elderly parents and people were struggling, being squished between taking care of their parents and their children and all sorts of things. It just became a reflection on change in general. This year, I really wanted to recommit to on a regular basis. I made a challenge for myself to blog every single day. And then I said, oh my gosh, what am I going to write about every single day? It occurred to me, I can write about my book collection because I have an extensive book collection. I have thousands of books at home, and then I have more on my phone. And more, I was going to say it was 400 on my phone, but then I started organizing them this weekend, and it's a lot more than that. So every day I write about one of my favorite books and books that I'm reading that I haven't read in a while, or books that I just discovered. As I've started doing this, I've started going to podcasts from people who talk about books, and people who hear about my blog say, oh, you should read this book. I've been collecting more and more books to read that I'll be able to blog about.
You own more than 400 on the phone, and how many at home?
I want to say it's 4,500. It's hard to tell because I have a pretty small New York apartment. It's under 900 square feet. It's pretty small. And I have covered every flat wall surface with bookshelves. But then I ran out of space. So then I started putting books in front of books. So I have a row of books in the back, another row of books in the front. I've lost track of how many it is in total. My husband downloaded an app. He went through and scanned. He's such a sweetheart, scanned every single book and loaded them into the app. Now I have an electronic inventory of all of my books. And I think the last time he looked at it, he said there were like 4,500.
Yeah. I did some research, and the designer, Karl Lagerfeld, he owned, and I think I wrote possessed 300,000 books. So you're not as bad.
Oh,
yeah.
Great. I need Karl Lagerfeld's house so I can get more books.
I know. And what is the criteria for your books? What are you most drawn to? Obviously, I've been reading your blogs. I really enjoyed the writing. First of all, your writing is always spot on and it speaks to me, and I see what you're talking about. What books are you drawn to?
That's a really good question. I have a pretty omnivorous appetite for books because I worked in the book industry for a number of years. There were always books around that the publishers would bring books in, and the buyers would look at the books and they would maybe take some home with them. But then some of the ones they were, a book on dirt, do I need that? And they like throw it in the bin. And then those bins would go out onto what we call the free shelves. I would go to the free shelves. I'd be like, oh, look, a book on dirt. And then I'd pick it up. And so I have this incredible collection of books that are on topics like pedestrianism that nobody else would read. And then also because I was visiting so many bookstores in my role, people would recommend books and I would buy them, or that's how I learned about the great molasses flood of Boston. Was I went to Boston and somebody gave me a recommendation for a book about the great molasses flood. What cool thing that nobody outside Boston knows about. Or I would be just walking through the store and find something that was something local, and I would buy that. I just have this omnivorous collection of books. I'm a little bit different because a lot of people will write about like the National Book Awards and all the books that won these awards. I'm not a big awards groupie, and I could really care less about the bestseller list. I just want something fun to read. So I read a lot of the genres. I read a lot of mystery, a lot of science fiction, a lot of horror, and I read some romance. I read a lot of children's because I learned to read as a child and really developed my love of reading as a child. And there's some inner child inside of me that likes to reconnect with these books. And then I read a lot of nonfiction. I have a ton of books on coaching and business and management because that's my specialty. I must have a whole shelf and a half of books about how to figure out what you want to be when you grow up. I have a lot of books about animals and the nature and just esoteric things. I'm interested in diversity of life and how different people think. And I'm interested in books that will take me out of my world and put me in another world, whether that's a historical world or a fictional world or whatever. I have some fiction, some classics, not a lot. You're not going to come to my house and find all the great classics. I read Catcher in the Rye a million years ago and could care less about it. If you read what I'm writing, you're reading about books that you may not have heard of before, or you may have heard of and forgotten about because you read it when you were a child. Those are the kind of books I read.
Important these days. I agree with you. Maybe the listeners don't know, but to become a bestseller, especially on the New York Times, you need to sell 5,000 books in your first week when you publish your book. So does that mean it's a good book? Not necessarily. You need to have a PR or a marketing person to make sure 5,000 books are being sold, or you buy all of the 5,000 books. It cannot be the same zip code. You have to be very clever because it's not that easy.
Yeah, I was in the business for a long time. I know a little bit about how things get on the bestseller list, and it's not always because it's the best book. Some people like books that other people have said are good books. Sometimes that inflates people that end up on the top of the bestseller list all the time because other people will say this is a good book and you should read it. I'm more interested in kind of interesting, quirky books that are not necessarily something that everybody's going to say, this is an interesting book to read.
I'm reading at the moment the book. It's called The Appeal. It's written in only email format. And it's in a way very disturbing. It's the new thing. It's not like a story page after page. So you have like this person writes an email to that person. It's hard to keep track. I don't enjoy it so much, I have to say. Yeah. Tell us about your books. How do you pick the books? So do you write a week ahead, or do you write every other day or every day? So how is your routine going?
That's a really good question. I read a book on change management a few years ago where someone talked about the transformative power of writing and how a factory had gone out of business and there were 4,000 managers, middle managers of this factory. They split them into two groups. And one group, they said, they gave them all the outplacement services and support groups and resume service, all the things you get when you get fired. And then the other group, they did exactly the same things, except they also gave them a job. Their job was they had to write 20 minutes a day. The group that wrote 20 minutes a day, and they could write, I don't want to write anything. They could write, I hate this job search. They could write whatever they wanted to write. They didn't have to show it to anybody. They just had to write. The group that wrote every day got employed faster than the other group. Power of writing is really important. I try to write 20 minutes a day, whether I'm writing my blog or just writing in my diary or writing fiction or writing nonfiction or whatever. I get up very early in the morning and I write, I exercise and shower and everything. And then I sit and write for about an hour. And sometimes I'll knock out a blog in a day. Sometimes I will knock out a couple. On Saturday, I sat down and wrote 5. I like to be a few days ahead because you never know if you're going to get to that day and your alarm doesn't go off, or you have to go early, or you have to catch a flight or something, and you just don't have time to write. And I don't want to break my habit of writing every single day. I write every day, and I set my blogs up to post at 8 o'clock in the morning every single day. And but I'm going to write about, sometimes I will say, oh, I feel like writing about the women on the Western Trail. That's something I'm very interested in, is the pioneer women who were in the covered wagons going west. And so I have a whole shelf of books about that. And I'll be like, that's what I'm going to write about. And I'll pull out a stack of books. I'll write about this one, and then I'll write about that one, and then I'll write about this one. And then they'll sit there in that little stack for a week. And while I write about horror books or something else. Then sometimes I put them back on the shelf and I say, okay, I'm going to come back to you later. Sometimes I'm not going to write about this book because I didn't really enjoy this book. And then sometimes I say, there's something about this book that I want to write about because it says something about the practice of writing, or the practice of thinking through a plot, or what it feels like when you have an early success and then it becomes your job and you have to move from developing something to operating something, and it becomes a challenge. I'm not really like strategically sitting down and putting together a list and going like, on Valentine's Day, I'm going to write about this. It's really more impulsive than that.
Okay, that was my question. I have a friend and she every Monday is Motivation Monday. So you don't have that. I like that in a way. Whatever feels good to you is what you're writing.
Yeah. Yeah. I sat down at one point and I was writing. Monday, I wrote a cookbook, and Tuesday, I wrote about a children's book, and Wednesday, I wrote about a picture book. Thursday, I wrote about a business book. And I was like, this is pretty peripatetic. Maybe I should sit down and say, okay, January is going to be all about children's books. And then I thought, what? But I'm writing about whatever is in my mind. Sometimes I'm writing about the books, but I'm also writing about what the books mean to me and what's in my mind. And so it's really hard to do that when you have planned out a whole month of, I just feel like that's really hard. A few years ago, I tried to increase the SEO value of my blog. And so I read all these things about how do you get people to read your blog? I did, and it got more people to read my blog. But honestly, I didn't enjoy it as much because I didn't feel like I was writing what was in my heart and what people would enjoy. I felt like I was just writing, put a number in the title and it'll sell more. I don't feel the need to do this. It's very much a reflection of me and my voice and what I'm thinking about and what I'm trying to say to people about life, the universe, and everything, quote unquote.
So now my question, what is your favorite book, is kind of like obsolete because you have so many.
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. And it's a really hard question to answer. I find that sometimes when I'm writing, I'm like, oh, I loved this book. How many books can I say I loved this book about? But I go back to, there are a couple of books that I had when I was a child that I go back to. And I would say those are some of my favorite books. And one of them is The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder, which is part of the Little House series. And it's right in the middle. And it's the story of how she and her family survived a winter with 17 blizzards. And they had this town that they were living in had just been, and they were living actually out on the prairie in a claim shanty, it had no insulation. It was one board thick and a layer of tar paper. Didn't even have something over the tar paper. And it was one room and it was unheated. And the first blizzard hit. The father said, we'd better move into town. And they had a building in town where they were renting out. And the people there who were renting it said, we're not sticking around for this. And they left. And so they moved into the thing in town. And at first, it was really great. They had all this community with the neighbors and the kids went to school. And then blizzards kept hitting. And there was a point where the kids almost didn't make it back to the town from school, which was on the outskirts of town, because the blizzard was so thick that they couldn't see where they were going. And then everyone was pretty much after that trapped in their houses because you never knew when another blizzard was going to hit. And because this was a brand new town, nobody had had a chance to plant crops yet. So no one had built up a full root cellar full of crops. A lot of people didn't have animals yet, and they were dependent on the railroad to bring everything in. And the storms were so bad that the railroad couldn't come in. And by the end of the winter, they were starting to starve. The end of what would have been the winter. The last snowstorm hit, I want to say in April. Around February, everybody started to starve. They literally ran out of food. Some very brave people managed to bring some food into town, some raw wheat that people toasted and then ground and made into bread and stuff. But when the trains finally started running again on the morning that the train came into town, the mother of the family had just made the last of the wheat into pancakes or cookies for them. And each person she made a big one for the father and a slightly smaller one for the mother, and smaller, the sizes were kind of graduated down to the smallest child got the smallest. And just the fact that they lived through this and it was such a hardship to them, there's just something moving about that to me, this triumph spirit. That one is definitely one of my favorite books. And then the other one is called Sandbangs and Moonshine. That's about a little girl. It's a picture book about a little girl who lives with her father, who goes away all the time to sea. And my father was away a lot when I was a child. And she lies on the rug in the sunshine in her house and daydreams. When her father comes home, she tells him stories, and he says, "You do know these are just stories about mermaids and things." She says, "Yeah." But she gets her daydreaming gets her into trouble, and she looks like I looked when I was that age. I used to lie in a little pool of sunshine and daydream. She had a black cat. I had a black cat. She lived on the beach. I lived on the beach. She had a friend who was a little boy who lived down the beach. I had a friend who was a little boy who lived there. So it's such a beautiful book, and it just speaks to me.
I just want to find more time to read. How much time do you find to read? Obviously, all of your 4,500 books. Have you read all of them, or you have some that you have not read?
I have read most of them. I will admit it, about 100 of them probably belong to my husband. Of the ones that are left, I've probably read all but 50. Those 50, I buy them, and then I say, I'm going to read this, and then I put it down, and then something else happens. But I do a lot of my reading now. I read it at bed every night. I read for an hour, and those are books that I've mostly read before, my old favorites. In fact, I blogged about some books earlier this year, and I was like, I haven't read that one in a while. I'm going to read it again. And those became my bedtime books. But the new books, I tend to read on my phone because I read a lot when I'm traveling, because it's easy to carry that many books. I used to carry a big bag of books when I traveled, and now I just carry my phone. Most of my newer books I'm reading on my phone, and I'll read on the plane, or I'll read we travel and we're staying at a hotel or something like that. I'll read a lot of the newer ones, but I've always got my phone with me. So if I get stuck in a line at the bank or the subway stops between stops or something, I can read as well. That's when I'm doing most of my new reading. Although Saturday was great. It poured down rain here. I got my chores out of the way and made a big cup of tea and sat and read a brand new book all day. It was such a luxury to be able to do that.
What do you do when you don't work, like work meaning blogging? So reading, enjoying when it's pouring outside.
Yeah, reading is big for me. You're a runner, but I'm a walker. I don't know if you find this, but when I walk, my brain works a lot more. All the creativity, like the blood flow to the brain improves so much that I get very creative. I've had days where I was walking. I used to walk 10 miles on Saturday and then 10 miles again on Sunday. I'd go to the park and walk around the park. There were days when I would sit, I'd be walking, and then I'd be like, I have to write this down. And I'd sit down on the bench and pull out a notebook and jot down things. And then I'd put the notebook away and be like, back to walking. And I'd walk, and I'd get another couple miles in, and I'd be like, what a great idea. And I'd sit down and write some more. I do some walking, and then I work full time. I have a day job. And then my husband and I are starting to travel again, which we did a lot of traveling before COVID, and we haven't done as much since then. And so just renewed our passports and are off to explore the world, which means I'll have lots of time to read.
Thank you for giving us a glimpse into your book life. To me, reading is also a luxury. It's a fantastic way to learn about other things and just crazy things. And why not read something out of the ordinary? Not so much the bestsellers, but something that's really cool. So thank you so much for this conversation. And I cannot wait to read your blogs every day. Thank you so much for doing that for us.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne, for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I just need to find more time to read and also read your blog. The blog is fantastic, to say the least. Thank you so much, Libby, for doing that for us, but also probably for yourself. Take it from the Ironwoman. We have episodes every Monday. Come and join us. Learn from interesting people who have a cool story that they are sharing. And Take It from the Ironwoman is also the book Global Business Coaching with Sports Parallels. We'll see you next time. Thank you for your support, and make sure to subscribe on all the social media channels. Bye-bye.